Patty Simpson with Simpson Math. Let's create frequency tables. Here we're going to have quantitative data. Remember that quantitative data is just a quantity. We've collected some sort of measurement or count in order to have quantitative data. So it's not quite as easy to make a frequency table with quantitative data as it was with qualitative data. With qualitative data, we had set categories. It was easy to divide up the categories. But here, I don't know where my categories fall. For instance, in this data, every one of these, well, not all of them, but a lot of these look different. You know, there's not a set category. And if I use each one of the different numbers, I'm going to have a lot of different categories. And it's just going to have one data value in each one of those, or maybe two data values in each one. So we need another way to create some classes or bins or categories. So the first thing we're going to do is determine the number of classes or bins that we want. How many categories do we want? And usually, depending on our data set, we're going to have between 5 and 20 classes. Now, if we have a small data set, we're going to probably have a small number of classes. If we have a large data set, then we're going to have maybe more classes. We just want the classes to show our data. So, you know, just having 5 classes, it may be even all the way across, and that doesn't show us anything about the data. But if we have 20 different pieces or categories, it may just show one in every category. That doesn't help us either. So we're trying to look for some sort of pattern within it. We need to make sure that our classes or categories, the number of those that we have, helps to determine or helps us to see those patterns. There are a couple of different ways to determine how many classes or bins or categories you need, but a lot of them involve upper level math, like maybe finding a logarithm. And we may not know yet how to find a logarithm, so I'm always going to give you the number of classes that you're going to need. The second step that we're going to do is we're going to determine an appropriate width for each of those classes. So, you know, am I going from 0 to 10? Am I going from 0 to 20? Am I going from 0 to 100? How wide is my class or my category going to be? And that kind of depends on my data, and it depends on the number of classes I have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these steps where I find how spread out is my data. You know, if all my data is within one unit, then my widths need to be really, really tiny. But if my data is way spread out, then my widths are going to need to be wider. So the first thing I need to know is how spread out is my data. So I'm going to take my biggest number and my smallest number and subtract them to find out how spread out the data is. Then I'm going to divide that by the number of classes I want. So if I have 100 width, and I have only 5 classes, I know then that I've got to divide that up so that it's 20 in each class. But if it's 1 and I'm dividing it into 5 classes, well then it's going to be, you know, 2/10 for each of the widths. So I'm going to divide by the number of classes I have. And then the last thing I need to do is round up from that to make sure that I'm getting all my data values in there. So let me give you an example. Here I have some data where I have the prices of 3D TVs in dollars. And I want to find out how wide my bins need to be. How wide do my classes or categories need to be? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find, let me first tell you that we're going to use 5 bins. So we're going to use 5 bins, and we're just going to take and we're going to find how spread out our data is first. So we're going to do our maximum number minus our minimum number. In our case, our maximum number appears to be this $1,999. So I'm going to find the range, how spread out is my data. I'm going to take that $1,999 and I'm going to subtract my smallest number. And in this case, my smallest price is $1,594. So I'm going to find out how wide a range is my data. So just a little subtraction there, 5, 0, and 4. So it's 405 units wide. The price is range by $405. Then once I have my range, I'm going to divide it by the number of classes or bins that I'm going to have. So here I have to find the width, I'm going to take my range and divide it by the number of bins or classes. So I divide 405 by 5. 5 goes into 40 8 times. 5 goes into 5 1 time. So my classes need to be at least 81. Oh, but wait a minute, I said we need to round it up. So they need to be at least 82 units wide in order for me to fit all the data values into them. So it's got to be at least 82 units wide. So this finding the width just shows me that minimum number. But it doesn't mean that I have to count by that. And in fact, counting by 82s doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And I'm not sure that it'll really represent my data very well. I am trying to display this data to make it easy for my readers. So if I look at my data and I think about what it might make sense to count by, I start thinking about, well, maybe it makes sense to count by 10s or 20s or 50s. But all of those numbers are smaller than this. I have to count by at least 82s. But I don't want to count by 82s. But what about 100? 100's a nice, easy thing to count by, and yet it's bigger than 82, but not too far off from it. So I'm going to count by 100s. So this is just the minimum width. The minimum width. But I'm going to make my width will be 100. I'm going to count by 100s. So I'm going to make 5 classes, and my classes are going to be 100 units wide. Let's do that. Let's create our 5 classes so that they are 100 units wide. Now I need to start at the smallest number. I need to at least start down at 1594. Maybe I want to start down at 1500 to make sure that I'm counting then to make it easy to count by hundreds. Or maybe I want to count at 1550. And then it'll also be an easy place for me to count by hundreds. So that starting place, I just need to make sure that when I'm done, that I've gotten all my data values in it. Let's try starting at 1500 and let's see if we can get all our data values in there. So I'm going to count from 1500 to 1600. Actually, I'm going to go 1500, and then in the next class, I'm going to start at 1600. And in the next class, I'm going to start at 1700. And then the next one is going to be 1800. And the next class is going to start at 1900. Now, those classes have ending points too. So if I'm starting at 1500, then I'm ending right below this 1600. So in this case, down 1 would be 1599. So this first class goes from 1500 to 1599, and I'm going to include all the values in that price range. My next class or bin, I'm now going to count by hundreds down that ending point, or we call that the class limit. So counting by hundreds from 1599 to 1699, 1799, 1899, and 1999. So if I look at each one of these, did I get all my data value in there? Well, the maximum number is 1999. He has a spot to be. He's in this class or that bin. my smallest number is 1594, he has a spot where he belongs. So all of my data is going to fit in those 5 classes. I counted by a nice reasonable number that was at least 82 units wide. Now, in order to make a frequency table, once we have our classes or bin, it's not too bad. Now we are just going to count how many are in each one of those categories. So here, these are my prices. And on this side, I'm going to put the frequency or the number of TVs in each of those categories. And there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can go through and count and see how many TVs are in this price range between $1,500 and $1,599. So you know there's 1, 2 within that range. So maybe I do it that way. Or you could go through each one of them and write down a tally mark until you have them all there. Whichever is easiest for you. I'm just going to count how many are in each range. So there were 2 between the 1,500, within that 1,500 to 1,599 range. Between, or from 1,600 to 1,699, well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values. Between 1,700 and 1,799, we have 1,799, 1, 2, 3, 4 data values. So on my frequencies, I'm going to write a 4. Then between 1,800 and 1,899, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 data values in that range, in that category. And then from 1,900 to 1,999, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 within that range. Now to make sure that I got them all, or to make sure at least that I have the right number, I'm going to add these up. So that's 2 plus 5 is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I have a total of 20 TVs that are represented on this frequency table. I also have a total of 20 prices here because there were 4 times 5 prices makes a total of 20 prices. So I have included everybody on my frequency distribution. Remember, on all of our displays, we should have titles. I didn't leave enough room at the top for my titles, so I'm going to put my title on the bottom. But all of our displays should have titles. So this one is just the prices of 3D TVs. So when we make our frequency tables, the first thing we have to do is figure out our categories, our classes or bins. And we're going to use that width and the range, the number of, we're going to use our range and the number of classes to figure out our width. And then we're going to think about what makes sense to count by and count by those. So there's our frequency table where we can see how many data points are within each one of those categories. Math Made Simple is Simpson Math. Thanks for watching.